Hi, I'm Todd Jones, host of the podcast Pressbox Access. Here's a clip from my interview with Kevin Blackistone. Kevin talks about how social justice issues and protest have always been intertwined with sports.
Prior to doing sports, I covered economics for about 4 or 5 years. And before that, I did news, most of which was investigative journalism, actually data journalism, into social justice affairs, which we didn't call social justice journalism at the time, and we didn't call data journalism at the time. We just called it reporting. So for the last 30 years doing sports has been a lot of fun. It's taken me around the country. It's also taken me around the world. Seen a transformation of the sports media industry, not only in the way that it does business, but also in the types of stories that it is interested in.
Well, the individuals matter, right? I mean, we think
Absolutely.
of sports, we dehumanize it, but the individuals matter. And I think, well, look what's going on with the social context of sports now with Colin Kaepernick, in 2016. But he was just he didn't start sports protests. It's been going on for 100 years. It's always been part of the society we live in. There's no separation. And I think that's what you bring to the coverage of the events and the movements and the individuals. I mean, you put it in such great cultural context that I always feel like I learn something when I read a Kevin Blackistone column.
I appreciate that. It's it's a history that's it hasn't fully been told. That's why I teach a course in Maryland, and it's called Sports Protest and Media. After the Kaepernick deal in August of 2016, talking to students, I realized that they kind of felt that Colin Kaepernick had started something. And I had to tell them, right, well, no, he didn't start anything. He kind of picked up where some other folks left off. And so I put together this course called Sports Protest and Media, where I try and do a few things. Number one, I try and show students that sports and politics have been bedfellows since sports were born. The marathon race was born out of a run made by a soldier to alert Athens as to what was about to happen. That was the political reason for the marathon. And then I try and make them understand that not only have they been bedfellows forever, but sport is a natural platform for protests for a number of different reasons that scholars have made very clear as they've studied it. And then the other thing I like them to know is that there have been many instances along the way where people have used sports to protest.
And
sometimes it's been people in sports, and sometimes it's been people outside of sports who have used sports to protest.
Think about like Rose Robinson, right? Rose Robinson was a black high jumper.
Sure.
1959, I believe.
Yep.
She protested against the American foreign policy at the Pan Am Games.
Yep.
And she refused to stand for the national anthem. She was Kaepernick of her time.
Yeah.
In 1959, but I don't think people we don't think past last week, right?
No, exactly. And her story, really didn't get covered until the past few years. So, people need to understand that so that we don't it's kind of like my mother used to say, there's little that's new today, right? When you start looking back in history, and that's absolutely true. And when you have protests in sports, it has a great impact. And even people who don't pay attention to sports will pay attention to sports when something happens in sports that is transcendent.
So you've done this for 40 years. And you're still doing it at a high level. I'm not making you retire, but what's next? What do you want to do next in your career?
I've been working on a film project the last 5 years now, and slowly making progress towards the end.
It's about Native American mascots, right?
Yeah, it's called Imagining the Indian. It's all about the deleterious effects of Native mascotting, and when you think about it, which we try and explain in this film, why is it so relevant? Why is this important to get rid of these names? And what is the real damage done? And if you think about what happened to indigenous people in this country when Europeans arrived on the shore, it is a stunning Holocaust. We talk about racism and how do we get here? And what do we do to eradicate it? Racism started with what happened to indigenous people. That is the seed on this continent. In order to eradicate racism, we have to understand what happened to these people and how we were, and in this particular instance, how sport and commercialism was an integral part in that. And so it was very interesting just to watch how the protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder caught up to this idea. It swept Confederate imagery and Confederate monuments out of our
teams changing their names. Yeah, right.
And somehow teams changing their names.
Yeah.
The Washington football team, the Cleveland baseball team. Atlanta, you're up next. Chicago, you're up next.
You're on the clock.
Golden State, you're up next.